Picture this. It's spring, 1864. Inside the largest palace complex in 19th century China, a 49-year-old man is bent over in a flower bed, picking weeds. He puts them in a basket. He calls them manna. He calls them sweet dew, sometimes manna. He believes God is providing for him personally through the plants growing between the paving stones. Outside the palace walls, in the city he rules, people are eating bark off trees. Some of them are eating each other. But the heavenly king, the younger brother of Jesus Christ, is in his garden picking dandelions.
Okay, so we're starting here.
We're starting here. This is Xiuquan in the final months. Spence describes it in God's Chinese sun, and Spence is usually quite restrained, but he writes it almost like a fairy tale that's gone septic. The God King in the garden, eating weeds while his kingdom starves.
Is he alone out there? Like, is there a retinue watching him do this?
That's the thing. By 1862, 1863, he's basically stopped appearing in public. He stopped giving audiences. The palace women see him, a handful of attendants. He communicates with the outside world through edicts that are getting more and more, I want to say baroque, but actually they're more like the marginalia of someone arguing with God in real time.
So it's a wellness blog now.
Sophie.
No, hear me out. Forage your own divine providence. Eat what the Lord puts at your feet. Detox from earthly grain. He's 2,000 years too early. He could have had a Netflix special. Like, the absurdity is genuinely, you can't write this. A man whose entire theology started with a fever dream now ends with a foraging hobby. There's a horrible symmetry to it.
And here's where it stops being funny. He's not just doing it himself. He's ordering everyone else to do it too.
Oh, God.
There are edicts that survive. Spence quotes them, where Hong essentially says, there's enough manna for everyone. Go pick it. God will provide. And the people in Nanjing, who are already eating leather and paper, are being instructed by their king to go forage in a city that has been under siege for nearly 2 years. There are no weeds left, Sophie. There are no weeds left because they've been eaten.
Yeah, that's not a wellness blog. That's a death cult with a gardening section.
And they obey him. That's what I can't get past. They obey him because he is still in the theology of the kingdom, the brother of Christ. To disobey him is to disobey God. So you take your basket and you go out into a stripped city and you try to find something to eat and you don't and you die. And he's still in the garden.
Can I ask the obvious question? Is he mad at this point? Like, clinically? Or is this performance?
I think it's the question of the entire late kingdom, and I don't think we can answer it cleanly. Spence leans towards sincere derangement, that Hong genuinely believes what he's saying. Other historians think he checked out of reality years earlier, somewhere around 1856 after the Night of Long Knives. And by 1864, there's nothing left of the man who climbed up that hill in Guangxi as a failed examinee. He's a vessel for a theology that's eating itself.
I keep thinking of Hitler in the bunker ordering Steiner's army to attack. Like the moment where the map and the territory have completely diverged and the leader is still moving pins around.
That's exactly the comparison Platt makes, actually. Autumn in the Heavenly Kingdom, Platt frames Hong's last year as a kind of Fuhrer-bunker scenario. The phantom armies, the imaginary supplies, the God talk getting louder as the real world contracts to one room and one garden.
And meanwhile, someone in this kingdom is still trying to actually run the war. Right? Because we know Nanjing holds for ages. So someone is doing the work while Hong is doing salad?
Li Shucheng, the loyal king. And he is... Sophie, I want to spend real time on Li because I think he's one of the most extraordinary figures in the entire 19th century, and almost nobody in the English-speaking world has heard of him.
Set him up for me. Who is he in this moment?
He's the last real general the Taiping have. He's been running their entire eastern campaign for years. He has, by 1863, reluctantly come to understand that the war is unwinnable. The Xiang army is at the gates, the ever-victorious army has rolled up the surrounding territory, Suzhou has fallen, Hangzhou is about to fall, Nanjing is going to starve. And Li Xiuquan, sometime in late 1863, goes to Xiuquan and says, and I'm paraphrasing the confession here, "Your Majesty, we have to leave. We have to break out west, we have to find food and territory, we cannot hold this city."
And Hong's response is the famous line.
Hong's response is, and this comes through Li's own confession, the version Zheng edited and published, "I have received the sacred command of God. I have come to be the only Lord under heaven. Who is the Lord of this kingdom of mountains and rivers? It is I."
Yeah, okay.
And Platt's line on this is just devastating. He writes that from that moment on, Li Xiuquan knew the kingdom was finished. He was, quote, "just buying time for a corpse."
Buying time for a corpse. Oh, God.
And he stays. That's the thing that I find, I don't know whether to call it noble or tragic or something darker. Li Xiuquan knows the cause is dead. He's been told to his face by the man who supposedly is the cause. And he stays. He fights for another 7-8 months. He organises the defence. He tries to get grain in. He's running a city under siege for a king who's in the garden.
Is that loyalty, though? Or is that... I don't want to be cynical about this, but where's he going to go?
That's the question, isn't it? He's a long hair. He's the most recognisable rebel general in China. The Qing have a price on his head that would buy a province. If he defects, he gets sliced. If he runs, he gets caught. So is he loyal, or is he just trapped?
I think it can be both. People are messy like that. You can be a man with no options and also a man who was chosen on some level to die with the thing you built.
Yeah. And I think the confession suggests both. We'll get to the confession. It's one of the great documents of the century, but it has both registers. There's the dutiful officer reporting facts, and there's a man who knows he served a god who turned out to be a man eating weeds.
Okay, so while Li is doing this, while Hong is gardening, the man whose job it is to actually take the city is doing what?
Right, so this is where we have to bring in Zheng Kuoqian, younger brother of Zheng Kuofan. And Sophie, I'm going to ask you to do this one because the comparison is yours.
Oh, the Vicksburg thing.
The Vicksburg thing.
Okay, so 1863. While everyone in the English-speaking world is paying attention to Ulysses S. Grant besieging Vicksburg, Mississippi with about 75,000 men. And we treat this, rightly, as one of the great campaigns of the American Civil War. On the other side of the planet, Zheng Kuoqian is besieging the city of Nanjing. And Platt has this comparison that I cannot get out of my head. Nanjing's walls are 21 miles long. It is, at this point, one of the largest urban fortifications on Earth. It is roughly 10 times the size of Vicksburg.
10 times.
10 times! And Zheng Kuoqian is going to spend nearly 2 years digging trenches and tunnels around a city wall that goes on for 21 miles, with, at peak, about 100,000 troops. And nobody in the West is paying attention to this. Nobody. Sherman is about to march to the sea, and we still teach that. We do not teach this.
And the soldiers call him Zheng the Butcher. Zheng Tipi. Not affectionately.
Right, and that's the nickname they give him before the city falls, which tells you what kind of operation this is.
It tells you everything, because the Shang army is... Look, Zheng Kuofan presents this thing as a Confucian gentleman's militia. Disciplined, scholarly officers, peasant soldiers paid properly, fighting for civilization against a death cult. That's the propaganda. The reality on the ground at Nanjing is 2 years of mud, disease, trench warfare, and a commander whose nickname is the Butcher.
And, sorry, one more thing on the scale. The gunpowder mine they eventually used to breach the wall is 6,000 kilograms, 6 tons of gunpowder under the Taiping Gate. And 10 days later, on the other side of the planet at Petersburg, the Union Army is going to detonate roughly 4 tons onto a Confederate fort. And we call that the Battle of the Crater and put it in every Civil War textbook.
Same year, same technology, same desperation, same era of industrial siege warfare globally. And one of them is famous, and one of them is, in the West, almost invisible.
Why is that, James? Genuinely, what is the actual reason?
Language, sources, the lens of empire. We read the Civil War in English from people whose grandkids were our teachers. We read the Taiping through translations, often partial, often through 19th century missionaries with their own agendas. And this is uncomfortable, but I think it's true. We're more comfortable with a war about slavery and union than a war about a Chinese carpenter who thought he was Jesus' brother. One of those stories fits into our civilizational self-image. The other one just sits there, being enormous and weird and foreign.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that tracks.
Anyway, the crater killed thousands. The Nanjing breach is going to kill 100,000. The scales are not comparable. We'll come back to that. But first, I want to take you inside the walls.
Okay.
So, inside Nanjing, by spring 1864, the food situation has... I don't even know how to describe it. The siege has been tightening for 2 years. The grain stores are gone. The animals are gone. They've eaten the horses, the dogs, the rats. By March, April, May, they're eating the bark off trees. They're eating leather. They're eating paper. There are accounts of people boiling old books because the paste in the binding has nutritional value.
Oh, God.
And then we get to the thing that Sophie, I want to handle this carefully because the sources here are contested, but they corroborate. There is cannibalism in Nanjing in 1864. It's in Li Xiuquan's confession, it's in multiple Taiping internal documents, and it's in Augustus Lindley, who was a British sympathiser, a man named Lin Lei, who actually lived inside the kingdom and fought for it. And Lindley writes about it in Taiping Tianquo, his huge memoir of the rebellion.
And Lindley is sympathetic to the Taiping, so he has no reason to exaggerate horror inside the city.
Exactly. If anything, he has the opposite incentive. And Lindley writes, and this line has stayed with me, he writes that the dead were food for the living, and the living were food for tomorrow. There are reports of human flesh being sold at market prices. There are reports of soldiers trading it. Li Xiuquan's confession refers to it almost matter-of-factly, which is in some ways the most chilling thing about it. He's not sensationalizing, he's reporting.
Yeah. Yeah, that's Leningrad. That's the same dynamic, urban encirclement. The food taboo collapses, and what's left after is a city of people who don't talk about what they did in the winter.
And 80 years before Leningrad, the same mechanism, a modern siege of a modern city. And the modernity makes it worse because the city's bigger and the encirclement is more complete.
Can I sit with something for a second?
Please.
Hong is in the garden, picking weeds, calling them manna, and telling his subjects that God will provide if they go and do the same. And in the streets outside the palace, his subjects are at the same moment eating the dead. And he doesn't know. Or he knows and he doesn't care, or he knows and he's reinterpreted it as God's will. And I don't know which of those three is worst.
I think the answer might be that all three are true at different hours of the day. And that's what total derangement looks like at the top of a totalizing regime.
So when does he die?
June 1st, 1864, 6 weeks before the city falls. And here's the thing, Sophie, this is the bit that I find almost theologically perfect in a horrible way. The cause of death is contested. Qing officials at the time claimed suicide by poison. That's their preferred story because a suicide reads as despair, which is what you want from your defeated enemy. Li Xiuquan's confession says he died of illness, specifically from eating the sweet dew.
From the weeds.
From the weeds. And recent scholarship, Spence among others, leans toward food poisoning or dysentery from the very plants he'd been calling manna.
He ate the dandelions, and the dandelions killed him.
He ate the dandelions and the dandelions killed him. And Spence's verdict, and I think this is one of the greatest single lines in modern historical writing, Spence says he was killed by his own theology.
That's a sentence that does a lot of work.
Because it's not just that the food was bad, it's that the entire framework, God will provide, the weeds are manna, you don't need rice if you have faith, that framework literally metabolized into his body and killed him. The doctrine became the cause of death.
And there's something almost Greek about that. Like, this is the structure of a tragedy. The thing the protagonist most fervently believes turns out to be the mechanism of his destruction. Oedipus solving the riddle that names him as the killer. Hong eating the manna that proves there was no manna.
And it happens quietly. That's the other thing. There's no last stand, there's no defiant speech, there's no martyrdom in the conventional sense. A 49-year-old man with chronic dysentery dies in his palace from eating bad greens, and the people around him don't even announce it for weeks because they don't know what to do.
Wait, they hide it?
They hide it for weeks. Because if the brother of Jesus Christ has died, what does that mean theologically, politically, for morale? They wrap his body in yellow embroidered silk, imperial yellow, and they bury him without a coffin in the palace grounds. And they tell almost nobody.
Without a coffin?
Without a coffin? Which is, in 19th century China, that's not nothing. That's not how you bury an emperor. But there are no coffins left, or there's no time, or there's some theological reason I haven't seen properly explained. So he goes into the ground, in silk, in the garden where he'd been picking the weeds. The garden? Of course, the garden. The garden! And he stays there for about 6 weeks, until the wall comes down.
And then what happens to him?
Sophie, they fired him from a cannon.
I'm sorry, what?
They fired him from a cannon.
Okay, we are going to have to slow this down because I have follow-up questions.
Right, so 6 weeks after the burial, the wall comes down, we'll get to that in a minute, and Zheng Guoquan's troops are in the palace within hours.
Zheng the butcher.
Zheng the butcher. And one of the first things he wants is the body. He needs proof. Beijing needs proof. Hong Xiuquan has been a phantom for so long, nobody's seen him in public for years, that the question of whether he's even real anymore is weirdly an open one in some Qing circles.
Hold on, genuinely? People doubted he existed.
Not existed, but there were rumours he died years before, and the kingdom was being run by a council pretending he was alive, which, ironically, is sort of what was happening in the last few months anyway. So Zheng Guoquan rounds up surviving palace women, concubines, attendants, and makes them identify the body.
Oh, God.
They dig him up. The yellow silk is still on him. The women confirm, yes, that's him. And then Zheng Guoquan, and you can read this in Zheng Guofan's own memorials to the throne, has the corpse decapitated. The head is sent off separately for verification. The body is burned. And then, and Philip Kuhn writes about this in Rebellion and Its Enemies, the ashes are loaded into a cannon and fired.
Fired where? Like, at what? Was there a target?
That's the question nobody asks, and I love you for asking it. The answer is, it doesn't matter. The point isn't the target, the point is dispersal. The phrasing in the official record is that no part of him should remain to receive worship. So you scatter the ashes by the most violent means available, which in 1864 is artillery.
So it's not even an execution, it's an anti-relic operation.
Exactly, it's theology. They are doing theology with a cannon.
Doing theology with a cannon is the title of the episode, James. I'm sorry, I'm calling it now.
I'll allow it. But think about the precedents. Cromwell. They dig him up after the Restoration, hang the corpse, behead it, stick the head on a pole at Westminster. That's vengeance and theatre. The Soviets cremating Hitler in a parking lot in Magdeburg in the 70s and dumping the ashes in a river.
That's specifically to prevent a shrine. This is in the same family. Zheng Guofan knew his Chinese history. He knew what happens when a martyr has a tomb.
And Hong was, theologically, the younger brother of Jesus Christ. Even a fingernail in a reliquary somewhere could anchor a cult for the next 100 years.
Right, you cannot leave bones. So the canon is, in its grotesque way, rational.
I want to push back gently. Was that really the calculation, or are we being too generous? Because the alternative reading is Zheng Guoquan's brothers lost relatives to Taiping forces. His clan, his Hunan network, has been bleeding for 10 years. This might just be rage. Personal, family, blood rage, dressed up as policy.
There's a memorial he writes to the throne after the sack. Spence quotes from it, where the rhetorical discipline is perfect. Every sentence is calibrated. Every claim is hedged exactly right. And the brother is loading up the riverboats 40 miles away. The letter is the man. So is the riverboat. There's no resolving it.
Okay, hold that thought, because I want to come back to the Zheng family and the looting, but can we talk about the boy?
Hong Tianguifu.
Hong Tianguifu, because I've been reading about him and he's the part of this story I cannot stop thinking about, James. He's 15 years old, 16 by Chinese count. His father has just died from eating weeds. The kingdom is being shelled. And the thing that gets me is how he was raised.
Tell it. This one's yours.
So this boy has been inside the palace basically his entire life. He's never been in a city street as a private person. He has been forbidden, formally forbidden, on theological grounds, from reading what the Taiping called demonic books, which means the Confucian classics, which means basically every book a Chinese boy of his class would have grown up on. The Analects, Mencius, the poetry, none of it. He doesn't get any of it.
And instead he gets
his father's Bible. He gets his father's marginal notes correcting God. He gets the Taiping religious tracts. That's his education. He's reading a homemade theology produced by a man who, by this point in the boy's life, is eating weeds in the garden.
Oh, that's a curriculum.
And okay, the other detail, and I'm going to try to make this funny because otherwise I'll cry. By age 9, he had been formally assigned 88 wives.
There's a bureaucrat in there somewhere whose entire job function is... I don't even know how you file that paperwork.
88. Now, in his own later confession, he says, and Spence quotes this, he says he was never actually allowed to touch any of them. They were assigned to him as a kind of, I don't know, royal household furniture. Imagine the spreadsheet, James. Imagine the bureaucrat whose entire job is the harem allocation for a 9-year-old who would rather be reading.
Wife number 43, please report to the eastern courtyard. Wife 44?
The young monarch will not be touching you today, or any day. Please continue not being touched in an orderly fashion.
Stop.
But it's funny for about 4 seconds, and then it isn't. Because what it actually is, it's a child raised as a constitutional symbol, not as a person. He has no friends his age. He has no education in the civilization he was born into. He has 88 notional consorts and 0 actual relationships. He's a fiction his father has been performing on.
And the confession? Have you read the full confession?
I've read the translation in Michael's Taiping Rebellion History and Documents, and he writes, and I'm going to get the phrasing slightly wrong, but it's something like, I am young and have no learning. He says it more than once. He says it like he's apologising. And then he asks repeatedly whether he could be allowed to live and to study with a Confucian tutor. He wants a tutor, James. That's what he asks for. From the people who are about to slice him to death.
He wanted the books his father had burned.
He wanted the books his father had burned. And we should sit with that for a second, because the whole Taiping movement, in some ways, was a war against those books.
Can I do the tangent on that? Because I think it matters.
Please.
Okay, so when we talk about how radical the Taiping were, in the English-speaking world, the headline is usually the Christianity, right? Hong thinks he's Jesus' brother, the whole movement is a heterodox Protestant offshoot, the missionaries are horrified. That's the story that translates. But I think that's actually underselling what they did, because the more profound break, the more existentially weird thing the Taiping did, was to declare the Confucian canon, and I mean the 4 books, the 5 classics, the entire corpus that had been the operating system of Chinese governance, education, ethics and social life for roughly 2,000 years. They declared all of it demonic.
Think about what that means. Every literate person in China at this point has memorized as a child the Analects of Confucius. Every official has passed exams on the Mencius and the Book of Documents. The state itself, bureaucratic Confucianism, is structured around these texts. They are the air the educated class breathes. And the Taiping say, this is poison. Burn it. Outlaw it. Anyone caught reading it is committing a religious crime. They go into the libraries of conquered cities and burn the canon. Not Peter Heather, that's the Romans. Jen Mei Yu writes about this. The systematic destruction of Confucian libraries in the Taiping zone is one of the great cultural losses of the 19th century. And we barely talk about it because the war itself was so big it eclipsed everything. And the reason this is a deeper break than the Christianity is, China has imported foreign religions before. Buddhism took 600 years to settle in, but it settled. Islam, Nestorian Christianity, Manichaeism. China has a long history of absorbing exotic theology. What it had not done, ever, in any dynasty, was tear up the Confucian floor. Even the Mongols, who conquered the whole place, kept the exam system once they stabilised. Even the Manchus, who were foreign conquerors, performed Confucian rites enthusiastically. The Taiping were the first power in 2 millennia to say, the operating system is the problem. We're deleting it.
And the boy raised inside that ban, Hong Tianguifu, is the perfect specimen of what that world would have produced. A literate Chinese youth who has never encountered Confucius. And in 2 months, that boy will write in his own hand, asking to be allowed to study the very books his father burned. The system was rejecting itself from inside the palace, in the person of the heir.
God.
Yeah.
It's like, sorry, this is going to sound weird, but it's like a child raised by an extreme cult who, the moment they're out, asks for the textbook. The instinct is intact even when the access has been denied.
Right. There's something almost biological about the pull of that tradition. He'd never read a line of Mencius, and he wanted Mencius. Because the world around him, the servants, the captured tutors, the very architecture of Nanjing was still Confucian underneath the Taiping paint.
And they sliced him to death.
They sliced him to death. November 18th, 1864. Ling Qi. The full version by all accounts. He was 15.
We'll come back to him. Let's come back to him. Tell me about the wall coming down. Because that's the hinge, isn't it? That's the moment.
That's the moment. So, July 19th, 1864.
6 weeks after Hong dies in the garden.
6 weeks after Hong dies in the garden, Zheng Guoquan has had his men digging tunnels under the Nanjing wall for months. And we need to be honest about the scale here. Nanjing's wall is 21 miles long. 21 miles! It is, at this moment in 1864, one of the largest urban fortifications on the planet. London doesn't have a wall like this. Paris doesn't have a wall like this. The walls of Nanjing are a Ming Dynasty engineering project from the 14th century, and they are massive. And he's been besieging it for how long?
Nearly 2 years of close investment, years of looser pressure before that. The tunnels are the breakthrough. His engineers have been mining toward the Taiping Gate, that's the gate on the northeast, and on the morning of July 19th, they pack the end of the tunnel with 6,000 kilograms of gunpowder.
That's, what, the weight of a loaded train carriage?
under a wall that's been standing since the 14th century.
6,000 kilos. Largest siege mine in Chinese military history to that point. They light it, they pull back, and the explosion blows a 60-yard breach in the wall. 60 yards of Ming masonry simply ceases to exist. And the troops pour in. The heavenly capital, and I want you to hear this number, the heavenly capital had stood for 11 years, 4 months and 19 days. From the Taiping entry in March 1853 to the breach of July 1864. 11 years, 4 months, 19 days.
Wait, hang on, that's roughly twice the length of the American Civil War. In a single city. Under siege at the end.
That's Platt's exact comparison, yeah. Twice the American Civil War in one capital.
Okay, I want to do something with the 1864 thing. Because, James, this is bothering me. Can I do a tangent? I want to do a tangent.
Go.
Because the thing I cannot stop thinking about with this episode, and I've been sitting with this for days, is that July 1864 is globally the year of the tunnel, the year of the industrial siege mine. 10 days after the breach at Nanjing, on the other side of the planet, Union engineers under the 48th Pennsylvania, who were coal miners in civilian life mostly, are finishing their own tunnel underneath Confederate lines at Petersburg, Virginia. Same idea. Pack the end with gunpowder, blow a hole in the fortifications, pour the troops in. And on July 30th, 11 days after Nanjing, they light it. 4 tons of powder. So smaller than Nanjing 6, but still industrial scale. And they blow a crater in the Confederate line that's 170 feet long and 30 feet deep. The Battle of the Crater, which famously becomes a catastrophe for the Union because the assault is bungled and the soldiers go down into the crater instead of around it, and the Confederates pick them off.
But the point is, same month, same technology, same desperation, same theory of how you end a siege in 1864. You go underneath, you pack the void with chemistry, and you industrialize the breach. And these two events are not in the same history book. They are not in the same conversation. The English-speaking world remembers the crater because it's bloody and ironic, and Faulkner wrote about it, and it's in Ken Burns. Nobody outside specialist circles knows the Taiping Gate.
And the crater killed, what, 4,000?
About 4,000 casualties total, Union and Confederate combined. The Nanjing breach kicks off 3 days that kill by Zhang Guofan's own count over 100,000 people.
Right, so the scales are not comparable. And that's the thing we keep having to come back to in this whole series. We are not telling the story of an Asian-American Civil War. We are telling the story of a war that swallows the American Civil War 25 times over and happens partly in the same year. And the crater is a footnote inside it.
But what fascinates me is the simultaneity, because it suggests that 1864 globally is a moment. Like, the technology of siege has reached a particular point. Black powder, deep mining, professionalized engineers, and on both sides of the planet, generals are reaching for the same tool in the same month to solve the same problem. How do you crack a city that won't surrender?
And in the same year, the Russians are finishing their conquest of the Caucasus, the British have just put down the last embers of the Indian Mutiny aftermath, France is in Mexico, Poland's January uprising has just been crushed. The whole world is in some kind of paroxysm in the mid-1860s.
It's a hinge decade. And the Taiping is the largest single event in it. And we don't teach it. Anyway, sorry. Back to the breach. But the crater killed thousands. The Nanjing breach killed 100,000. The scales are not comparable. And I keep needing to say that because every time I make the parallel, I worry I'm flattening it.
No, you're right to make the parallel and right to break it. Both. Okay, so the troops come in through the breach. And what happens over the next 3 days is... Sophie, I have to do this carefully because I find this part very hard to talk about.
Take your time.
Toby Meyer Fong, in What Remains, which is the best book in English on the cultural memory of this war, she does something very simple and very devastating with Zheng Guofan's own writing. Zheng Guofan reports to the throne, in his official memorial, that his troops killed over 100,000 long-haired rebels in the sack of Nanjing. And he adds, and this is the line Ma Yafeng drills into, he adds that not a single rebel surrendered. Not one.
How is that sentence in an official memorial to the throne and nobody in Beijing reads it as a confession? Or did they? Did they know what they were being told?
Not one. And Ma Yafeng's verdict on that sentence is, I'm paraphrasing slightly, that it is mathematically impossible. 100,000 people did not all choose to die fighting in a starving city that had already lost. Some of them were soldiers. Many of them were old men, women, children, the elderly, the sick, the people who'd been eating bark for months and could barely stand. Not one surrendered is not a description of valour. It is a confession dressed as a denial. Zheng is telling the throne, in code, that his army massacred the civilian population. And he's telling them in a form that allows everyone to look the other way.
And his diary?
The diary corroborates. He writes about it. He writes about the killing. He doesn't pretend the killing didn't happen. He just frames it as the killing of rebels. Every corpse is a rebel by definition because every corpse is in Nanjing. The category of civilian has been abolished.
Cool. Cool.
3 days. Officially sanctioned. The troops have not been paid regularly for years. They have been told implicitly and sometimes explicitly that Nanjing is the prize. So they take it. They take the city apart. They strip every house, every temple, every palace. And Zheng Guoquan, the brother, Zheng Guoquan personally ships home an absolutely enormous fortune to the family estates in Hunan. Platt is very good on this. He says the loot takes weeks of riverboats to move. Weeks! A flotilla!
The Confucian gentleman's brother is at the back stealing the silver?
It's exactly it. And Zheng Guofan spends the rest of his life managing the political fallout of his brother's fortune. Because, of course, people noticed. Of course, the throne noticed. You cannot move that much wealth up the Yangtze without it being a public scandal in slow motion.
And this is the army that was supposed to be the disciplined Confucian alternative to Taiping fanaticism.
This is the army. And here's where I have to push back on my own earlier framing, because I think I've been too charitable to Zheng Guofan across this series. The image he cultivates is the model Confucian, the scholar general, the disciplined letter writer, the man who reads the Analects every morning. And it's true that he does all that. But it's also true that he edits Li Xiucheng's confession before publishing it. It's also true that he executes Li against direct orders from Beijing. It's also true that his army kills 100,000 people in 3 days, and his brother gets rich enough to fill a flotilla. The Confucian gentleman performance and the warlord operation are happening simultaneously in the same man, and I think we have to hold both.
Can we talk about Li?
Yeah, let's talk about Li.
Because, earlier in this conversation, we talked about Li begging Hong to evacuate, months before the fall. And Hong refused him with that line, "Who is the lord of this kingdom of mountains and rivers? It is I." Platt's verdict was that Li knew, from that moment, that he was buying time for a corpse.
Right.
And what Li does on the night of the breach is the part that I keep coming back to. He could have run. He's the loyal king. He has the best horse in the city. He has, a handful of loyal officers around him? He could have gone alone, faster, cleaner. He might have made it to a southern province, regrouped, lived.
He could have, and for a moment, Platt suggests this, reading between the lines of Li's own later account. For a moment, he almost did. He had the horse saddled, and then he went back into the palace.
He goes and gets Hong Tiangiafu.
He goes and gets Hong Tiangiafu.
He goes and gets the son of the man who would not listen to him. The son of the man whose theology has killed the kingdom Lai has been defending. The teenager who has 88 notional wives and no Confucian education and is basically a stranger to the city he's been the heir of. Lai goes and finds him, gets him out of the palace, gets him through the streets in the chaos of the sack, gets him to a horse. And then... James, this is the bit. Tell me I'm remembering this right. Tell me it's true.
Tell you what's true.
That he gave him his horse.
He gave him his horse.
He had the better mount, the faster one, the one that might have carried him to safety. And he gave it to the boy and took the worse horse for himself.
He gave the boy his horse, and the boy got further than he did. Tiangiafu made it out into Jiangxi and wandered for 2.5 months. Lai's exhausted mount gave out the next day. He was caught by peasants, not soldiers, who recognized him, stripped the jewels sewn into the lining of his clothes, and turned him in for the reward.
He gave away his only chance to a boy who, by every political calculation, was already finished.
He gave away his only chance, and this is the callback that's been killing me. He did it for the son of the man who, when Li had begged him to abandon Nanjing and save the kingdom, had answered, "Who is the lord of this kingdom? It is I." Hong wouldn't hear him. Hong wouldn't move. And months later, Li takes Hong's son out of the rubble of the kingdom Hong refused to leave and gives him the horse that could have saved his own life.
Yeah. That's not loyalty to the king anymore, is it? That's not even loyalty to the cause. That's something else.
I don't know what to call it. Honour, maybe. Or I think it might just be that some people, when the whole structure has rotted out from under them, hold to one last form. He couldn't save the kingdom. He couldn't save Hong. He couldn't save the city. He could put a boy on a fast horse.
And then they put him in a cage.
Wooden. In Zheng Guofan's camp. Outside the ruined city. And, Sophie, this is the part of the whole story that I find genuinely awe-inspiring, in the old sense of the word.
Tell her.
They give him paper. They give him ink and a brush. They give him a low table. And they tell him, write your life. Write what happened. Write everything. And over the next 9 days, in a cage in July heat, in a camp full of the army that has just killed his city, Li Xiuquan writes roughly 50,000 characters.
In 9 days. In July. In a cage. That's not a deposition. That's a man making sure he gets to exist after they kill him.
Kerwin, in Taiping Rebel, which is the best English study of the deposition, makes this point very directly. 50,000 characters in 9 days, with brush and ink, by a man who knew with absolute certainty that every page he completed brought him closer to the executioner. He was not writing to be saved. There was no version of this where he walked out. He was writing because, well, that's the question, isn't it? Why was he writing?
Because someone had to.
Because someone had to. Because he had been inside the thing. Because he had seen Hong eat the weeds and refuse to leave. Because he had given a boy a horse. Because if he didn't write it, the only record left would be Zheng Guofan's memorials to a throne that wanted to forget.
And the document survives.
The document survives. Edited, heavily edited, we now know. The original was kept hidden by the Zheng family and didn't surface in full until 1962. But it survives. 50,000 characters from a wooden cage. And at the end of the 9 days, when they take him out to execute him, by his own diary, Zheng Guofan records that Li met his death, I'm quoting, like a true man. Composed, reciting verse.
He was reciting poetry.
He was reciting poetry. And Zheng, who could have ordered the full Ling Chi, death by 1,000 cuts, ordered the executioner to make it quick.
The man whose army had just spent 3 days not making anything quick for anyone in Nanjing.
Yeah.
There's a kind of grace there. A horrible, partial, late grace. But it's there.
It's there. And I think, for me, and I don't know how to make this sound less sentimental than it's going to, for me, the 9 days in the cage are the moment in the whole war when a human being, inside the collapse, says, I will leave a record. Whatever you do to my body, the writing goes on the paper, and the paper outlasts you.
And it did.
And it did. We're sitting here in a podcast studio a century and a half later quoting him. The cage didn't win.
Okay. I need to sit with that for a second.
Yeah.
Because the cage didn't win is a beautiful line, James, and I think it's true. But I want to push on it. Because the same man who gave him the brush and the paper and the low table, that same man killed him 18 days after capturing him. Against direct orders from Beijing.
Yeah, he did.
Beijing wanted Li Xiuqing sent to the capital. That was the protocol. Captured rebel leader of his stature, you put him in a prison cart, you send him north, the emperor's people interrogate him, you have a trial, you make a public spectacle, and then you execute him. That's how it works.
That's how it works.
Zhang Guofan, the model Confucian, the disciplined civil servant, the man whose whole brand is restraint, looks at this order and goes, no, actually, I think we'll do it here, in my camp, in 18 days. And the reason he gives is, and I'm paraphrasing because I want you to tell me if I'm being unfair, the reason is essentially transporting him would be dangerous.
That is the reason he gives, yes.
Dangerous how? He's in a cage. He's a man in his 40s who's been on starvation rations for a year. What's he going to do? Overpower the convoy with his 50,000 characters?
Right, when you put it like that.
Herwan's reading in Taiping Rebel, and this is the bit I keep coming back to, is that Zheng killed Li to bury what Li knew. And what did Li know?
He knew where the money went.
He knew where the money went. He'd been inside the heavenly capital for years. He knew what was in Hong's treasury. He knew, presumably, what was not in Hong's treasury by the time the Shang army got there, and whose riverboats it had left on.
The Confucian gentleman's brother at the back stealing the silver.
The Confucian gentleman's brother is at the back stealing the silver, and the Confucian gentleman's front making sure the only man who could testify about it doesn't make it to Beijing.
Okay. So, let me try to defend him, and then tell me where I'm being too charitable, because I admitted earlier I've been too charitable to Zheng across this whole series, and I want to be honest about that.
Go on.
The defense is, Li Xiuqing was genuinely a magnet for revolt. There were still Taiping bands in the field. There were still mountain holdouts. Putting him on a slow boat up the Grand Canal with an armed escort for weeks, every village he passes is a place where loyalists could try to free him. There's a real argument that a Beijing trial was a political risk the dynasty couldn't afford. That's the defense.
And the prosecution?
The prosecution is that Zheng edited the confession before publishing it. He cut things. The family kept the original manuscript hidden for 98 years. It didn't surface in full until 1962. 98 years of a Chinese family sitting on a primary source.
The family sat on it longer than the Meiji Restoration took to industrialise Japan.
That's not archival neglect, that's a decision made repeatedly every decade to keep the lid on. Which is not the behaviour of a family with nothing to hide. No. That's the behaviour of a family that knows what's in the document. Yeah. I'm not going to pretend I've resolved this for myself, by the way. I think Zheng admired Li. I think the quick death instead of the Lingqi was real. I think the diary entry, like a true man, is real respect. And I think he killed him to shut him up. Both things.
Both things. People are like that. People are like that. Right. I want to follow the other horse.
The other horse.
Because Li gives Tiang Weifu the fast amount, and Li gets caught. Question 1. What happens to the boy?
Right. So the young monarch, 15 years old by Western count, 16 by Chinese, gets out of Nanjing on Li's horse. He has a small group of loyalists with him. They head southwest into Jiangxi province, trying to get to remote country where there might still be Taiping sympathizers. Or, some of them are arguing, keep going, get to Vietnam.
Vietnam was a real plan?
Vietnam was a real plan that some of his lieutenants were pushing. Get the boy across the border, regroup, who knows. Others wanted to take him to a remote mountain province and try to rebuild a base. There's no agreement. They're a fugitive court without a country, arguing about geography while moving at night.
And for how long does this go on?
About 2.5 months, from late July, when Nanjing falls, into October. And during those 2.5 months, he is, Spence's phrase, I think, wandering. They're hiding in villages, they're sleeping in fields. The boy is in a stolen Qing uniform, which is the only disguise that makes sense, because any Taiping markings get you killed on sight.
The younger brother of Jesus Christ's son is dressed as one of the soldiers who's hunting him.
In a stolen Qing uniform. Yes, and in October, and I cannot get past this detail, he is found hiding in a haystack.
A haystack?
A haystack. In Jiangxi by Qing scouts.
You know what that is, James? That's Charles II in the Royal Oak. That's the doomed pretender in the tree. Except Charles II got to be king.
Charles II got to be king. Hong Tianguifu gets the confession room.
Tell me about the confession.
The confession is one of the most painful documents I have ever read. It's translated in Michael's The Taiping Rebellion History and Documents, which is the standard Western source, and you can read it in an afternoon. It is not long. And it is, Sophie, it is a child's voice. He writes, I'm not quoting exactly, but it's very close. I am young. I have no learning. I never wanted to be king.
He says he loves reading. He says he wants to study. And this is the bit that ruined me when I first read it. He asks if he can have a Confucian tutor. The books his father burned. He's in a cell, he knows what's coming, and the thing he reaches for is the Analects, Mencius, the operating system of the civilization his father declared demonic. That instinct survived everything.
He asks for a tutor. The books his father had banned, the demonic books, the Analects, the Mencius, the operating system of Chinese civilization for 2,000 years that the Taiping had outlawed inside the heavenly capital. This boy, raised in a palace with 88 nominal wives by the age of 9, never allowed to read any of it, locked in a Qing cell, asks for the books.
Did they give him the books?
No.
What did they give him?
On November 18th, 1864, they gave him the Lingqi. The full one. The slow slicing. He was 15 years old by Western count.
Yeah,
He asked for a tutor and they gave him 1,000 cuts. And we're the first people in 160 years to say his name in this particular sentence. I don't know what to do with that. And the argument is what? That the Qing had to make sure no Taiping pretender could rally remnants? That you can't leave a royal heir alive because Henry Tudor, Bonnie Prince Charlie history is full of examples?
That is the argument. And I would normally make it. I would normally say, look, sparing royal heirs is how you get civil wars in the next generation. The Qing had every reason.
But you don't need the Ling Qi to make the point. You can strangle a 15-year-old in a cell. You can quietly poison him. You can put him in a monastery in Tibet. The choice to use the slow slicing on a child who asked to read books, even contemporary Western observers in 1864, who were not squeamish people, even they were horrified.
Good.
And 5 days later, November 23rd, they executed Hong Rengan the same way.
The cousin, the reformer.
The cousin. The man who wrote, and I mean this seriously, this is in Platt, the most progressive political document produced anywhere in 19th century China. Railways, banks, newspapers, patent law, a modern state. Sliced to death November 23rd, 1864. And his final statement defended the Taiping cause and said China would adopt his reforms within a generation.
What he right?
He was right by about 40 years. The self-strengthening movement, the 1898 100 Days Reform, the Republican Revolution in 1911, railways, banks, newspapers, patent law. He just had the timing wrong.
So the man who could have modernised China was sliced to death in 1864. And 40 years later, China desperately tries to do the things he was proposing and fails and collapses into warlords.
And the thing that makes it unbearable is that Hong Rengan knew he was ahead of his time. He says it in the final statement, not bitterly, almost clinically. He could see the gap between where China was and where it needed to be, and he had the map. And the map died with him, and the country spent 40 years wandering without it.
And meanwhile in Beijing...
You have the other boy.
Talk to me about the other boy.
The Tongji Emperor, in the year Nanjing falls, is 8 years old. His father, the Shanfeng Emperor, had died 3 years earlier, fleeing the British and French who'd burned the Summer Palace. His mother is Cixi, who is in the process of becoming the most powerful person in Asia for the next 47 years.
So in 1864, China has 2 boy emperors.
China has 2 boy emperors. One is 15 and dying by inches in a Qing cell. The other is 8 and being protected by Cixi behind the walls of the Forbidden City.
And what happens to the 8-year-old?
He makes it to 18, and then he dies. Smallpox, officially. Syphilis, according to some persistent and probably scurrilous rumours. Either way, he's dead at 18. No heir. And Cixi installs the next boy emperor, who is her 3-year-old nephew.
So, neither boy made it out of his teens.
Neither boy made it out of his teens. The dynasty that won inherited its own catastrophes. The dynasty that lost was erased by Ling Qi. And the woman who actually ran the country for the next half-century was running it on borrowed boys.
Okay. Hit me with the number, James. I've been avoiding it the whole episode. Hit me with Cao Shuji.
Right. So, Cao Shuji is at Fudan, and his big work is the multi-volume Studies on the History of China's Population. Volume 5 is the Qing. And what he does, which had not really been done at this scale before, is he goes county by county. Local gazetteers, tax records, land registers, pre-war census figures versus post-war census figures. And he reconstructs the demographic damage at granular level.
What does he find?
He finds counties in Jiangsu and Anhui that lost 80% of their pre-war population.
80%?
4 out of 5 people. Gone. Not all killed in battle, most not killed in battle. Killed by famine, by disease, by the collapse of the agricultural cycle when there's no one to plant. by bandits in the aftermath, by the slow, grinding consequences of having your county fought over for 10 years.
And the headline figure?
The conservative estimate has always been 20 million. Cow's reconstruction, when you include famine, disease, and aftershocks, pushes it as high as 70 million.
70 million is more than the entire death toll of the Second World War.
More than the entire death toll of the Second World War, concentrated in a single decade, in a single region of a single country.
I know we did the argument earlier about whether you can count famine deaths against a war, and I still think you have to. We count Spanish flu against the First World War. We count the Bengal famine against the Second.
Yeah, I came around. You were right about that.
Tell me about the tigers.
After the war, the lower Yangtze region, which had been for 1,000 years the wealthiest, most populous, most cultured part of China, Suzhou, Hangzhou, Nanjing, the silk cities, the garden cities, the cities of poets. After the war, that region is a wasteland. Hangzhou loses something like 75% of its population. Suzhou is largely abandoned. And there are reports, Maya Fong cites these, Wakeman cites these, of tigers being seen in the suburbs of Suzhou.
Tigers in Suzhou.
Tigers in Suzhou.
That's the whole war in 5 words.
That's the whole war in 5 words.
A city famous for silk and scholars, and 5 years later there are tigers in the gardens.
Nature reclaiming the most cultivated landscape in Asia in the time it takes a child to start school.
Okay, I want to follow one more thread because I keep thinking about it. And we touched on it earlier with the Vietnam plan for Tien Phu. What actually happened to the survivors? Because not everybody died in Nanjing. There were Taiping in the field for years after.
Go on, follow it.
Because this is the bit of the story that nobody tells. The rebellion has its head literally fired out of a cannon. We'll come back to that. But the body keeps moving. Bands of survivors in the mountains, fighting as bandits into the late 1860s. Some of them cross into Vietnam.
And join the Black Flag Army.
The Black Flag Army, which in the 1880s is fighting the French in the Tonkin campaign. So you have Taiping veterans, men who watched Nanjing fall, 20 years later shooting at French Marines in Vietnam. The war doesn't end. It just migrates.
Bradley Camp Davis's Imperial Bandits is good on this. The afterlife of the rebellion as borderland insurgency.
And then there's the coolie trade, which is the bit that genuinely keeps me up at night because it's not in any of the Western popular histories. The lower Yangtze is depopulated. The economy is shattered. There are millions of displaced people. And at exactly that moment, the coolie ships are arriving in Chinese ports. Cuba, Peru, California, Australia.
The Guano Islands.
The Guano Islands off Peru. Lisa Yoon's work on this, The Coolie Speaks, is harrowing. These are basically indentured slaves. They're shipped across the Pacific in conditions that kill a significant percentage in transit. They land in places they cannot pronounce. They dig bird excrement off islands for fertilizer exports to European farms. And a meaningful number of them are Taiping veterans, refugees from the world's largest civil war, dying in the world's worst job. God. Taiping veterans dug guano on Pacific islands, while Xiuquan counted his looted silver in Hunan. Same war, same year, opposite ends of the human condition.
Yeah, that's it. Okay, bring us home. Tell me about the cannon, because I know you've been saving it.
I have been saving it. Right. So, Hong Xiuquan dies on June 1st, 1864, 6 weeks before Nanjing falls.
His body is wrapped in yellow embroidered silk, yellow being the imperial colour, which is itself an act of theological assertion, and buried without a coffin in the palace garden.
The garden where he picked the weeds.
The garden where he picked the weeds, buried in the soil that grew the manna that most likely killed him. Spence's line, he was killed by his own theology.
And then Zheng's army arrives.
And then Zheng Guochuan's army arrives, and they find palace women, and the palace women identify the grave, and they dig him up, they decapitate the corpse, they burn what's left, they take the ashes and they pack the ashes into a cannon, and they fire him.
They fired him from a cannon.
They fired him from a cannon, and Zheng's report to the throne is explicit about why, so that no part of him would remain to receive worship. No grave, no relic, no bone, no shrine, no pilgrimage site.
And there's a precedent inside Chinese history for exactly this, isn't there? The Yongle Emperor hunting down the last traces of the Jianwen Emperor after the coup, trying to prove there was no surviving claimant, no body to rally around. Zheng Guofan would have known that story. He grew up on it. The canon is a specifically Chinese solution to a specifically Chinese problem.
Exactly the same instinct. And here's the bit. Here's the bit that I think is the actual ending of this story. It didn't work.
Tell me why it didn't work.
Because in 1866, 2 years later, in a Hakka village in Guangdong, a boy is born. His name is Sun Wen. We know him as Sun Yat-sen. And he grows up listening to Taiping veterans tell stories around the village. By the time he is 10 years old, he is telling his playmates to call him Hong Xiuquan II.
2 years after the cannon.
2 years after the cannon, they blew his body into the air over the Yangtze, and a boy in Guangdong picked the name out of it before he was 10. And 45 years later, that boy overthrows the Qing dynasty.
And Mao?
And Mao. Born in Hunan in 1893, Zheng Guofan country, he grows up worshipping Zheng, the model of self-discipline, the Confucian gentleman, the local hero. And then in his 30s, around 25, 26, as he turns toward peasant revolution, he flips. He starts calling Zheng a reactionary butcher and Hong Xiuquan a true revolutionary. He plays both sides of the war that ended 30 years before he was born.
And which Mao won in the end.
Well, the Cultural Revolution suggests the apocalyptic prophet won.
So the lesson is, you cannot fire a man out of a cannon if his idea has already escaped.
After a pause, Zheng's engineers spent months on that tunnel. They were meticulous, and the one thing they couldn't mine under was a story that was already in the villages before the wall came down.
Zheng Guoquan did the most thorough physical erasure of a human being attempted anywhere in 19th century politics. The decapitation, the burning, the ashes, the cannon. The most determined effort to make sure not one molecule remained.
And?
And it didn't matter. The idea was already in the villages. The idea was already in the Hakka stories. The idea was in a boy who hadn't been born yet. They blew the body to atoms, and the name walked out of Guangdong on its own legs.
Yeah.
Earlier you said about Li Shucheng, the cage didn't win.
Yeah.
The cannon didn't win either.
No. The cannon didn't win either.
A failed examinee in Guangxi has a fever dream in 1837. And 175 years later, we're sitting in a podcast studio trying to count the dead, and the number is bigger than the Second World War, and the name is still being spoken by people who didn't lose anyone in it.
That's the story. That's the whole story.
Tigers in Suzhou. A boy asking for a tutor. A cage. A cannon. A haystack. A horse he gave away.
Yeah.
I don't have a clever ending for that, James.
I don't think it has one.
Then we won't give it one.
Then we won't give it one.
And it makes you look at characters like Charles Chinese Gordon differently, doesn't it? The British mercenary who helped train these forces, only to realise he'd created a monster he couldn't control.
Oh, Gordon is fascinating. He was so disgusted by the Qing generals executing surrendered Taiping leaders that he actually refused a massive gold medal from the emperor.
Classic Gordon. The guy who later went to Khartoum in Sudan to fight another self-proclaimed Islamic messiah, the Mahdi, and met almost the exact same apocalyptic end. Talk about having a type.
He really did. But beyond the generals, the mercenaries, and the crazy family trees of the Trinity, there is this one final silent reality of this war that we have to talk about. The numbers.
The demographic silence. Because when you look at the census data from the late 19th century, it's like looking at the surface of the moon.
It is. This is the part that always gets to me. Because history books love to talk about kings, treaties, and battles, but they skip over the quiet demographic erasure that follows. When the Qing dynasty finally conducted its first post-war census in the late 19th century, the numbers that came back were so catastrophic that the imperial officials thought there must have been a clerical error. Entire prefectures in the Yangtze River Valley, the richest, most fertile, most densely populated agricultural heartland of Asia, had lost over 70% of their population. 70%. Imagine 7 out of every 10 people you know just gone. This wasn't just from the immediate violence of the sword or the gunshot. The vast majority of these people died from the twin horsemen of the Taiping apocalypse: starvation and cholera. Because the Taiping had implemented the holy treasury system, which banned all private property and concentrated all grain in state warehouses, the traditional market networks completely collapsed. When a city was besieged, there was no food to buy, even if you had a room piled high with solid gold bricks. And so people ate weeds, then clay, then each other. When the war finally ended, the landscape was so empty that the Qing state had to orchestrate massive, forced migrations, moving millions of people from western provinces like Sichuan to repopulate the ancestral lands of Jiangsu and Jichang. The official death toll of the Taiping Rebellion is usually cited as 20 million. But modern forensic and demographic modelling, like the work of Stephen R. Platt, suggests that when you include the subsequent famines, the outbreaks of plague and the displacement, the real toll is closer to 70 million.
70 million people. That is more than the entire population of the United Kingdom today. It is significantly deadlier than the entire First World War, fought with simple muskets, iron swords, and raw, slow starvation. It is the deadliest civil conflict in human history. And yet, if you ask the average person on the street in London, New York, or Paris to name the most destructive war of the 19th century, they will say the American Civil War, which killed about 600,000 people. We have this massive Eurocentric blind spot for an event that literally reshaped the landscape of Asia, killed 10% of the Chinese population, and set the stage for every major revolution of the 20th century. It's a haunting, heavy quiet. A failed student, a 40-day fever, a red pen correcting the Bible, and a valley of 70 million ghosts.
70 million. It's a number that's so large it almost loses its meaning, doesn't it? It becomes a statistic rather than a collection of human lives.
It does. And that's why we have to focus on the individual fragments of the wreckage. The loyal king's final gift of his horse, a 15-year-old boy begging for a simple farm life, or the silk-clad women who chose the flames of the palace over the cruelty of the state.
Because those are the moments where the scale becomes human.
Well, you realise that this wasn't just a dry chapter in a textbook. It was a living nightmare for a generation of people who just wanted to survive the day.
Exactly. And it leaves us with this haunting question: what happens when a single person's private mental breakdown collides with an empire's slow-motion decay?
You get an apocalypse. You get a private vision that becomes a firestorm, burning away the old world to make room for a future that nobody, least of all the failed student from Guangxi, could have ever predicted.
And that is where we leave the Taiping Rebellion. A tragic, beautiful, and terrifying reminder of the explosive power of human belief.
I think I need a very long walk in a quiet park after this series, James. No weeds, just grass.
No manna for you today, just a good cup of tea, paid for in silver, of course.
Of course. Thanks, James. This was incredible.
Thank you, Sophie. And to everyone listening, until next time on Past Tense, try to keep your visions to yourself.